Before the kingdoms of Westeros knew the shadow of dragon wings, before the Iron Throne was forged in flame, there was a family living on the edge of a dying world. They were not the greatest of the Dragonlords, not the richest, not the most powerful, but they were the ones who listened. House Targaryen lived far from the glittering heart of Valyria, in a lonely stronghold shaped by smoke and stone. Dragonstone, dark, volcanic, whispering with fire beneath its foundations. They came to this place not by choice, but by warning. For Daenys the Dreamer had seen what others dared not imagine. Mountains splitting open, dragons falling from the sky, an empire swallowed in fire. And her father, Enar, believed her. He gathered his family, he gathered their dragons, and he left behind the greatest empire the world had ever known. Other Dragonlords mocked him. They called him fearful, foolish, lost. But Enar did not look back. On Dragonstone, they built a new life, quiet, harsh, carved from black stone and storm winds. They tended their dragons with care, their wings heavy with the weight of a dying homeland. They felt the tremors across the sea. They heard whispers carried by merchants of earthquakes, groaning mountains, dragons that screamed in the night. And Daenys watched the horizon, her silver hair drifting in the cold wind, her eyes filled with visions only she understood. She knew Valyria was fading. She felt its heartbeat falter. She felt its death approaching. And on the night the sky burned red, when ash drifted across the sea like a funeral shroud, the Targaryens understood the truth. The empire they had fled was gone. The Dragonlords were dead, and the Targaryens were the last embers of a world turned to ash. But from embers, fire can rise again, and on that lonely island of stone, a destiny ancient as flame waited to awaken. Aegon Targaryen grew into a man shaped by silence and storms, raised not in the splendor of Valyria, but in the shadowed halls of Dragonstone. He knew little of the empire his family had fled, only the whispers of fire, and the sorrow in Enar's eyes when he spoke of what once had been. But Aegon did not look east. His gaze turned west toward a land divided, fractured by pride and kingship. 7 kingdoms, 7 rulers, 7 blades pointed at one another. Aegon saw not nations, but opportunity. He was not a man of ambition in the way others understood it. He did not crave gold, or fame, or adoration. He sought order, structure, a single realm bound not by fear, but by unity. And he carried with him the one force that could make such a dream real. Balerion. The Black Dread. A creature born from the last fires of Valyria, his wings vast enough to swallow a storm, his shadow heavy enough to darken a field. When Aegon touched the dragon's scarred scales, he felt destiny stir beneath his hand. He built no alliances, no coalitions, no promises of shared thrones. He simply began. With his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys, and their dragons, Vhagar and Meraxes, Aegon crossed the narrow sea. The ground trembled beneath Balerion's landing. The sky cracked open with the beating of 3 colossal wings. And on a blackened hill overlooking a quiet bay, Aegon drove his sword into the earth. The conquest had begun. Some kingdoms knelt quickly, their rulers wise enough to see the future in flame. Others resisted. Harren the Black hid behind his towering walls, believing stone could defy fire. but stone melts. And when Balerion descended upon Harrenhal, his fire turned towers into rivers of glowing ruin. The Stormlands fought with fury, yet their defiance crumbled beneath the roar of Meraxes. In the Reach, armies gathered like waves, only to break against the sky itself as Vhagar swept over them like a living tempest. Yet not all victory came from fire. Old Town opened its gates at the sight of Aegon's banner, choosing peace over ash. And so, piece by piece, battle by battle, flight by fiery flight, Aegon reshaped the world. When at last the 7 crowns were gathered, Aegon forged them into one, a throne jagged and terrible, a monument of conquest and warning. A throne made from the swords of the defeated, twisted in fire beneath the breath of the Black Dread. And on that throne he was crowned Aegon of House Targaryen, first of his name, king of all Westeros. In that moment, the age of scattered kingdoms ended, and the age of dragons began. Under Aegon's rule, the 7 kingdoms did not merely bend, they breathed anew. The land that had once fractured under 1,000 rival crowns found itself woven together beneath a single banner, a banner of red and black, a banner of fire. And at its heart stood the dragons. They were no longer terrors of ancient stories or weapons used to settle old feuds. They became symbols, living declarations that the Targaryens were not just kings, but rulers set apart by blood and flame. In the years after the conquest, dragons filled the skies of Westeros once more. Their wings stirred the air above bustling markets. Their shadows swept across fields and forests. Their roars echoed through valleys, a reminder that power lived not in armies, but in the creatures born of Valyria's last breath. Dragonstone's caverns rumbled with life, and the great pit in King's Landing swelled with the sound of beating wings. New dragons hatched, scales glimmering, eyes burning with the fire of generations. And with each new birth, the realm felt safer beneath the Targaryen crown. For who would dare defy a king guarded by giants of flame? But the dragons were not the only force that shaped the era. Westeros grew prosperous under the early Targaryens. Roads stretched between distant towns. Trade thrived. Lands long divided by war became bound by the promise of peace. Kings who followed Aegon held the realm with steady hands. Jaehaerys the Wise, whose reign brought harmony across the realm. Alysanne, the Silver Queen, beloved from the north to the Reach. They built bridges, rewrote laws, and stitched together the wounds of conquest with patience rather than flame. It was a golden age, an era when dragons soared without chains, when the Targaryens ruled with balance, and when the world believed that fire could bring not only fear, but order. Yet, beneath all greatness lies a shadow. For dragons, though mighty, are creatures of fire, and fire does not obey. Some grew wild, untamed even by those of the blood. Some turned their fury upon each other, as nature dictated. And some were so large, so ancient, that even the Targaryens feared their hunger. But still, the age thrived. So long as dragons flew, the Targaryens were unshakable. So long as flame burned, the realm stood united. No kingdom dared rebel. No lord dared whisper treason. For all knew that above their banners, above their armies, above their greatest walls, there were wings capable of turning stone to ash. And so the dynasty rose higher and higher, lifted by the power of creatures the world had not seen since the Doom. It was an age of wonder, an age of peace, an age of dragons. But the higher a dynasty climbs, the farther it has to fall. The Targaryen dynasty had risen to greatness on the wings of dragons, but it would nearly destroy itself for the same reason. For fire is powerful, but fire is also pride. And in the hearts of those who carried the blood of the dragon, pride burned brighter than wisdom. The trouble began not with war, but with succession.
We must act before the king arrives.
If we are caught, we hang.
We will not be caught if we are swift.
A king grew old, a throne waited, and two heirs, both born of Targaryen blood, claimed the same crown. Rhaenyra, the king's chosen daughter, fierce, determined, raised to rule, and Aegon, her half-brother, crowned in secret, pushed forward by lords who feared a queen. It was a choice that split the realm, a single fracture that widened into a chasm. For when a Targaryen fights another Targaryen, the sky itself becomes a battlefield. Dragons that once soared side by side now circled each other like storms ready to break. Old loyalties shattered, oaths twisted, friendships burned to ash. Houses chose sides, some out of duty, others out of fear, and many simply to survive. And when the first sword was drawn, when the first fire was unleashed, there was no turning back. It began with whispers, but it ended in flame. Dragons met dragons in the sky, their roars tearing the clouds apart. Their wings beat against storms of ash. Their fire clashed like the anger of gods. Some battles were swift, a single strike from above, a burst of flame that drowned armies in light. Others were long and terrible. Dragons locked together, biting, clawing, tearing through scale and bone as they tumbled from the heavens. The air filled with the scent of burning flesh. The ground shook with the weight of falling giants. And all across Westeros, towns and fields that had stood untouched since the conquest burned beneath the fury of creatures born from fire. In the madness of war, even the mightiest dragons perished. Some drowned in rivers they boiled dry. Some crashed through castle walls that had once bowed before them. Some, wounded and broken, fled into the wilds, never to be seen again. But the greatest tragedy was not the death of beasts. It was the death of a family. Rhaenyra, betrayed by those she trusted, felt the crown slip from her grasp with every fire-blackened sunrise. Aegon, crowned in chaos, watched his realm crumble under the weight of a throne he had never truly sought. Brothers turned against brothers, sisters against sisters, mothers against sons. No god listened, no peace endured, only dragons and death. When the war finally ended, it left behind a kingdom charred and broken. Rhaenyra was gone, devoured by the very people she had hoped to rule. Aegon, too, shattered in body and spirit, held a crown that felt heavier than any blade. And the dragons, the proud ancient children of Valyria, were nearly extinct. The skies that had once thundered with their wings fell silent. The age of dragons had not ended, but it had been broken. And from the ashes of their civil war, the Targaryens emerged not as gods among men, but as mortals bound by their own ruin. The dance of the dragons had ended, but the wounds it carved into the Targaryen line never truly healed. Peace returned to the realm, but it was a fragile peace, a thin veil stretched over grief, fear, and memory. for the dragons were dying. One by one, the mighty beasts that had once ruled the skies grew sickly, small and weak. Their fire dimmed, their wings faltered, their shadows, once vast enough to darken armies, shrank into dying embers. The last great dragons lived out their days in darkness, chained beneath stone, too old and too broken to remember the sky. And as the dragons faded, so too did the power that had kept the realm united. Without them, the Targaryens stood alone. Kings rose whose shoulders were too narrow for the weight of the Iron Throne. Some ruled with wisdom, others with fear, but none carried the fire of their ancestors. Whispers spread through courts and taverns alike, whispers of weakness, of madness in the blood, of a dynasty slipping into decay. For the Targaryens had always believed that dragons were bound to their fate. And without dragons, what were they? Generations passed. Old enemies stirred. New rebellions sparked like dry leaves. And then came a king whose mind burned hotter than any dragon's flame. Aerys, second of his name, last of the dragon kings. He began his reign with hope, charm, grace, but slowly, like a rope unraveling strand by strand, his sanity slipped away. He saw betrayal in loyal eyes. He tasted poison in clean water. He feared shadows more than steel. And the realm shook beneath his paranoia. His councils dissolved. His friendships vanished. His judgments turned to cruelty so deep that even those sworn to his house felt fear coil around their hearts. The rebellion began as a spark, a single death, a single insult, a single moment where the king stepped too far into madness. But sparks, when fed by anger, become wildfire. Houses rose one by one, not against the throne, but against the man who sat upon it. Battles raged across fields once green with life. Rivers ran dark with the price of treason and loyalty alike. And in the heart of it all, the last dragons slept in silence, unable to defend the bloodline that had birthed them. When King's Landing fell, it fell not to dragons, but to men. Aerys died alone, surrounded not by flame but by the consequences of his own fear. His heir, Prince Rhaegar, a man loved by some, hated by others, fell on the banks of the Trident, his silver armor stained red. And the Targaryen line, once bright as the sun and fierce as fire, was reduced to two frightened children fleeing across the sea. Viserys, haunted by a crown he would never wear, and Daenerys, born in the midst of a storm, the last daughter of a fallen empire. They sailed into a world that no longer feared dragons, for no dragons remained, and the dynasty that had once conquered continents now lived only in stories, songs, and the memory of ashes. This was the fall of the Dragon Kings, a reminder etched into the bones of history that even those forged in fire can be consumed by it. And though the Targaryens would rise again in distant tales, their empire, great and terrible, had ended, not with flame, but with silence.